Good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to you on Tuesday, the 4th of July. We are in Australia, but we are going to say it anyway. Happy Independence Day to all our fellow Americans, wherever you are in the world. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to tonight's Live Clean Health Series webinar. We have a fabulous guest tonight. You're going to love this information. We've got Dr. Peter Dingle, all the way over from WA, as our guest, Western Australia, Perth, Western Australia, and he's actually going to deliver a fantastic presentation to you. Now, who is Dr. Peter Dingle? You will actually know him, and if you don't, you should get to know him. He is a phenomenal researcher. He researches the research. He's a research doctor. That's where the Dr. Peter Dingle comes from. Very prestigious, very well known, was head of Curtin University at some point. Challenges, my goodness, he challenges the medical profession. He challenges the establishment. He challenges me. He challenges you. And that's what we need. Sometimes we need somebody to come along and sort of rattle our cage a bit, to actually take us on a journey to actually find out solutions for ourselves, and with his help, he actually will help us take us to a whole new level of personal health and for our families. So I don't know if I've missed anything out, but I probably have, because I could have done a much better introduction. But Pete, it is just awesome to have you along tonight. And I want to just say this right at the beginning. Pete is actually, Dr. Peter Dingle is, actually I call him Pete, so sorry about that. Dr. Peter Dingle is actually joining us on the eastern seaboard of Australia, coming over to Queensland in August and September, and through the Victorian states in early October. And he is going to be coming to a town near you to actually empower you with some great health information. So we'll talk more about that at the end of tonight's webinar, but I'm just going to hand it straight over to you, Pete, and let's get going. Detox the junk from your body.
Thanks, Annie. Thank you very much for those kind words. And hi there, guys. It's always nice speaking to my friends in Modere and friends of the friends in Modere. And look, tonight I wanted to kind of touch on some new ideas and thoughts and so on. But before I do, I want to raise that whole idea about research. That's what I am. I go in and I do the research literally every day. I'm scouring some of the journals that comes through. And it's really interesting, because no matter what I publish on, excuse me, in terms of my blogs or my video clips on Facebook or anything, there's another one the next day. So I'm putting up information that is so current, but what amazes me is there is so much of it around. So just by looking and being a researcher, it taught me to question everything. But what amazes me most, I suppose, in our society is the so-called skeptics in the world are only skeptical about the people who ask the questions. So I'm the guy who asks the questions, and I want you to ask the questions. And I want you to listen to some of the things I'm going to say today and say, well, look, I want to find out more about that. I want to track it down, and then I want to share it with people, because that's what this is about. Educating the other people out there who aren't fortunate enough to be able to listen to this and get this information, but educating them about some of the things that they can do for their health. So the title, very briefly, it was kind of handed to me by Charlie and Anne, it was Detox the Junk from your body, but it's going to kind of jump around a lot, but on a lot, focus on a lot of the research that's coming out in my next book called Dangerous Beauty. And some of you may remember that little yellow one. Anyone remember that little yellow pocket book I used to have? And we sold 50,000 copies back from 1999. So over the last couple of years, I've been upgrading it, and we've now got over 1,000 scientific peer-reviewed studies that have gone into the book. And what amazes me is how different my thinking is now compared to when it was back in 1999. And so I really want to take you through that journey with me. And one of the things we're going to focus on, and we're going to come in and out of this topic a few times, and there's a couple of other pet topics I want to touch on, particularly right at the moment on breast cancer as well. But one of the areas is about diets and weight loss. And we're all in this stage at the moment. We're all motivated about teaching people weight loss and helping them on their diets with the right type of products and so on. But one of the neglected areas for most people is understanding the role toxins, things like in your cosmetics and personal care, and I'll put some of those up, cleaning agents, the things you put on your clothes in your washing machine that then goes onto your body when you wear the clothes, and of course even the things in the air, and the research on all of that. And one of the things that I emphasize in all my talks on weight loss is fad diets, and all those diets, the calorie counting, the fat loss, all that stuff. It doesn't work. Now, I know some of you guys are what does work is the stuff we're talking about here. It's the fiber, it's the probiotics. You will never lose weight. Never, ever lose weight and keep it off unless you do the gut microbiome. Never. How's that? And the same with toxic chemicals. If you're a person who's been lathering and slathering yourself with toxic chemicals and you're sniffing them and smelling them in the air all around you, then you are not going to lose that extra 5 or 10 kilos because your body won't let you. And you're going to feel tired and run down and lots of other things along the way. But let's with that one premise to begin with, and as I said, I'll keep bringing this back to weight loss along the way, but there are lots and lots of topics I want to touch on. And the first is a really simple diagram I'll put up there, and most of you say, "Wow, you're pretty good on your PowerPoint, Pete, aren't you? Gee, I'm good." No, look, yeah, I'm pretty crappy, aren't I? End of the day, though, it gets the point across. This is my demonstration of what we're doing. Now, that's my barrel of health. It can be a cup, a half full if you want to call it, or whatever you want. It doesn't matter. And in the top, we've got our health input. And our health input is all those things we do for our health to achieve optimal health. It's the healthy eating. It's lowering your toxic exposure. It's the positive attitude, the good thinking, working with friends, all of those things, family and relationships, all of those things to achieve optimal health. The only problem is, down at the bottom of it, you'll see we've got all these leaks in the barrel, leaks in the cup. We've got the stresses, our emotional and psychological stresses in our life. We've got the poor diet. So we've got the white breads and the sugar and the alcohol and all those other bits and pieces, the margarines of the world and all those things that are leaking out our health. And then down the bottom, I've got the one that we're going to focus on a bit today, toxins. And the toxins are exactly the same. Toxins are just a form of stress, and any form of stress tells your body, listen, here it is, really simple. Any form of stress tells your body not to lose weight, to hold on to weight, to put weight on. And you say, why? Because in the old days, the hunter-gatherers of 100,000 years or 500,000 years ago, whenever there was stress, for example, they were being chased by something or there was no food, the body would hold on to all the weight they could. They would conserve the energy. They would slow the metabolism. They'd alter the release of hormones and so on. So any form of stress, whether it's emotional, psychological, nutritional stress, or toxic stress, messages to the body to hold on to weight. Now, there are lots of other factors in there too, but if you understand that one basic concept, stress will hold on to weight. So when you're talking to people about losing weight, talk about that overall big picture. What are the stresses in your life? And I come across people who do the right thing to, in terms of they're eating right, and they're not really stressed. They've got a pretty balanced lifestyle, but then they've got the toxins. And they've got all these makeups they're slathering on and all these chemicals they're exposed to. And, they love that smell of toxic chemical and they think it's clean, the exact opposite. Or I know the person who's doing the right diet and eliminating toxins, but the stress. So like all the things I talk about, it's about having this holistic picture about health, but also here, weight loss. You've got to get people into this picture. And this is what's so unique about the program and the programs you have. Nobody else has them. Nobody else talks about probiotics and weight loss. Nobody else talks about, the fiber and weight loss. Nobody else talks about how the protein, and it's got to be a plant-based protein, not an animal. Nobody puts all these pictures together except you guys. That's what makes you so unique. But if you add that extra dimension that all those negative things they're doing in their life add to these stresses, and the stresses will continually add to the weight in their lives. And hence we continue to put weight on, and we're wondering, why were we going down that line? So if you've got that really basic model there, we go to the next one. And I thought I didn't want to do my normal gut talk, which, by the way, goes for about 3 days non-stop now. I just can't believe the amount of information in the gut. But I wanted to relate some really interesting phenomena, some really interesting science that's come out, showing that your gut is the major detox organ in your body. Now, of course, we all know the liver, right? We've got the detox organs, the liver, it breaks it all down, and the skin helps eliminate it, particularly under the arms, hence why if you're using an antiperspirant and so on, you're going to have problems. But, that we know that, but most people don't realize that the gut probably does more detoxing than all of the body combined. And it's the microbes in your gut, the right mix and match and combination and diversity of microbes in your gut that are going to determine what gets into your blood in the first place. So if you've got the right microbiome, if you're taking the right probiotics and you're doing the right things by, what I've told you over the years and what you'll hear from me constantly, then your microbiome is getting rid of so many, maybe 70, 80% of those toxins. The other key to this, though, is that the wrong gut microbes, the candidas of the world, the wrong bacteria and the wrong fungi that are in our gut, that are in there, in everyone's gut, but they're out of balance and there's too many of them. Those ones are also working by producing toxins. That's why this is so important, because your gut is the major interface between the outside world, the inside, and toxin exposure. And it's the gut toxins we now know, produced by the bacteria, by the fungi, that are actually causing, here it is, weight gain. That's why I've talked about the gut detox and the microbiome in weight loss, in my other tours and so on. So it's the poisons created by the wrong type of bacteria and mold in the gut that are causing people to put on weight, to develop diabetes, heart attack, stroke, blocked arteries, and so on. And it all comes from the gut. So what we want to do first, and of course, I'm not going to go into this now, because this is stuff you already hear about, know about, but you've got to detox. If you want to start to detox your whole body, you want to detox your gut microbiome. And I thought I had a bit of an epiphany. I thought it was a pretty great idea about 2 days ago. When you've got your microbes in your gut, they stimulate your immune system. Now, there are two aspects of your immune system. It's kind of like a weighing scale, one's up and one's down. One of them is called Th2, and your Th2 part of your immune system is your allergies. Now, what's really, really interesting is all of your toxic gut bacteria stimulate the Th2. So your candida, your botulism, the wrong type of staphylococcus, all of those microbiomes, the clostridium, all of those wrong microorganisms are stimulating the Th2, which is your allergic response. And in the meantime, it's weighing down so that your Th1, which is your immune response to bacteria and infections, pneumonia, and those diseases, is not working anymore. So these bacteria, I only just realized, my epiphany was that these bacteria are literally controlling your immune system for their benefit. The bad bugs in your belly, well, at least in your colon, in your intestines, are actually turning down your immune system, which protects you against bacteria infections and fungi infections and all these other infections. They're actually turning it down. They're controlling it. So that's why getting the gut right is so important. And that's why getting the gut right lowers your risk of allergies and all those autoimmune diseases and all those other conditions. And by the way, I've reviewed about 500 studies at the moment on the gut microbiome. So I can tell you right now, detox the gut, start with the gut. Now that then takes me on to the next one, which is what I'm going to focus on for the rest of it. But of course, what you've got to do is understand that a lot of these chemicals can have an impact directly on the gut as well. So the gut is influenced by everything from your stress. It's influenced from the toxic chemicals in the air, toxic chemicals in the food, toxic chemicals. All of those things can influence the gut. But the real research out here is showing that the more chemicals we're exposed to, the more weight we put on. And along those lines, we develop metabolic syndrome, high blood pressure. We develop insulin resistance and pre-diabetes and diabetes, and we develop increase our risk of heart attack and stroke. And of course, in there is weight gain. Now, there is so much research in the area. It started about 40 years ago, just by studies and really just association showing that the more you were exposed to air pollutants, and here we're just talking basic air pollutants, in the city and so on, the more you were exposed to them, the heavier the weight you put on, the sicker you got. Not respiratory illnesses and so on, but literally metabolic illnesses, all these ones, the metabolic syndrome. Now, since then, there have been thousands upon thousands of studies linking the exposure of all of these chemicals, all the different types of chemicals, virtually all of what we'd consider toxic, either directly, and I'll explain some of it later, or indirectly affect our weight gain. So one of the things that I love about the program you've got is no other group out there considers toxic chemicals in weight gain. And I would literally put it at the 5 to 10% factor. For some people who live in a healthy environment, it's not going to mean anything to them. But if there are people out there who are whacking on or, slathering and slashing all those chemicals on their skin and breathing them and cleaning with them and surrounding themselves with hundreds, thousands of chemicals every day, then they're the ones who are going to be burdened down by it and not lose weight. And I'll explain a little bit of why that is. But of course, one of the hints I've already given you is it'll affect the gut microbiome. And if the gut microbiome is being poisoned, then you're going to put on weight because it's poisoning the good microbes out there. Now, so given that, then we move on with that. Let's look at the biggest issue confronting us right now. This is without any doubt. Oops, we've just gone one slide too many there. Oh no! I hope it's let's hope it stays there for a while. I just selected this out of some of my other slide programs, so it may have had some of it programming. I apologise if it jumps on again. But what we've got here is the group of chemicals that I've been talking about 20 years, but I've really just got into in depth in the last 2 years, and they're called environmental estrogens or endocrine disruptors or xenoestrogens. They've got a whole raft of names, and the name changes slightly according to what they do. Now, these chemicals are probably the biggest environmental influence on weight gain. So that's what's so important. And all you've got to think, ladies, from a female perspective, you know the role estrogen has in terms of holding on to weight and different times of the month, even altering the ability to hold on to weight or lose weight and so on. And so we can instantly see this, but I'm going to go in a little bit more into that. And the research dates back to the 70s, when they realized that some chemicals coming out of the average, typical, everyday home was contaminating wildlife. And the wildlife were developing all of these strange conditions. We're talking about the alligators and the toads and the frogs and the fish and so on. They weren't able to reproduce. They were having reproductive problems. The females were no longer females. The males were no longer males. The males didn't have the bits that were needed for it. And if they did have the bits, they didn't know what to do with it. And so all of a sudden, these populations were being decimated. And this is in the Florida Everglades, which is a big swampy area. I think that's Florida anyway, but a big swampy area down in Florida. And they were looking and saying, wow, why are all these populations of wild animals being decimated? And they realized it came back to some really simple chemicals that were being put in detergents. Now, in the 70s, you may not remember, you may not have been around then. In the 70s, they were pretty harsh chemicals. I say harsh now, but in fact, we've probably got some worse products in a lot of the ones now at lower concentration, but worse products. So we've got rid of some of those harsh ones and we've substituted them for different ones. Now, these environmental estrogens, as a result of that, everyone started looking at it, and there are, again, tens of thousands of publications all about these various chemicals. Now, there's probably about 220 chemicals out there that are considered environmental estrogens. And I'm going to put up a couple of the main ones that we interfaced with earlier, but there's a whole raft of them. Some of you may remember some of the pesticides like DDT, which was a pesticide sprayed everywhere post-World War II, and it was literally banned in the 70s, and we lost it. in the 80s, but it's still detectable in your cells, in your fat, in wildlife around the world now. Even so, it's still available in some third world countries, which, by the way, is a good reason not to eat food from third world developing countries. So we've got DDT, PCB, some industrial chemicals, and a whole raft of these other industrial ones. But I'm not concerned about them. I'm concerned about the ones that we bring closer to us, and which overwhelmingly takes me on to the next one, breast cancer. There is so much research now linking environmental estrogens and breast cancer. In fact, I just did a little Facebook. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen it already. I only did it yesterday, put it up. It's probably got about 4,000 or 5,000 views at the moment. Please share it and get it out there. But after doing all the research and reviewing 1,000 studies to do with environmental estrogens, toxins, and breast cancer and so on, it's without any doubt that these chemicals are causing breast cancer. What's interesting is that we have this epidemic of breast cancer. 50 years ago, the rates of breast cancer were 1 in 20. 1 in 20. They're now 1 in 8. But it's not genetics, because genetics don't change. Something is triggering. But what's worse in that equation is that the highest rates, the fastest rate of breast cancer disease is in the young youth teenage category, which used to be 0, and now it's becoming much more commonplace. Just in the last couple of days, I've heard of women in their 20s and 30s. It used to be a disease of the 50s and 60s. Now it's the biggest cause of death in the 30s and 50 years of age. And breast cancer is. But what we do know about breast cancer, this is what again fascinates me, is that breast cancer, 2/3 of the breast cancers we now are confronted with, which is the increase in the last 20 years, 50 years, are what are called the estrogen receptive breast cancers. We know they are receptive to estrogen dominant people sometimes call it. So we know these estrogen related chemicals in our blood are leading to an increase in breast cancer. We know, for example, if you've got breast cancer, then you've got higher rates of estrogen. We know that if you take out breast cancer tissue, it's got higher levels of these foreign estrogen in there. You might know of a chemical called, tamoxifen. Tamoxifen, which is an anti-breast cancer chemotherapy. Tamoxifen literally just stops the estrogen receptors. How's that? It's doing exactly what we're doing, except we're saying don't get it in the first place. Get rid of the chemicals. And unfortunately, the medical industry won't say get rid of those chemicals out there. They'll just say, well, we'll give you a drug which is highly toxic, which is going to block the estrogen receptor, rather than say, well, let's just get rid of those extra estrogens out there. So we know these cancers are linked with estrogen. We also know, for example, that 2/3 of these cancers are in the upper quadrant near the armpits. Now, can you see a bit of an equation growing here? And the overwhelming studies now are linking breast cancer with the use of these antiperspirants, even deodorants, but the worst one are the antiperspirants, the deodorants, and of course, all the other chemicals that we put on our skin. Now, here is the next part of the interesting detox equation. When you eat something, as I told you earlier, it goes into your gut. Now, your gut starts to break it down. Your microbes will actually, do the good things and start to break it down and get rid of some of the toxins and eliminate it in the feces and so on. When you put something on the skin, when by the way it goes into the blood, then it then goes to the liver, and the liver then gets a chance at it. The liver says, well, I'm going to try and make you more water soluble, and I'm going to chuck you out and get rid of you. And that's how our body detoxes things, through food. When you put them on your skin, the different part of the equation is it goes straight into the blood. And yes, these chemicals go straight into the blood within minutes. And the peak of some of these chemicals going in the skin is 5 and 6 hours. So once you put them on, 5 or 6 hours later, they're at their peak in the blood. And the scary thing is people will put these things on 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times a day, making sure, and yes, they can accumulate, which I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But what we find is it goes straight into the skin, through the skin, into the blood, and it doesn't get the chance to detox before it's done one round of the body. So it's going to all these various organs. So if you're putting stuff on, toxic chemicals on your face, then the potential is it's going straight up to your brain without an ability to go through your liver to be broken down. And if you put it up on your chest, your breasts, your underarms, it goes in there and, of course, doesn't get a chance to be broken down before by your liver. Now, going back to this whole idea of wherever it goes in, it's likely to be at high concentrations. And of course, they find many of these, as I said earlier, the breast cancers in the upper quadrant, and they find an accumulation of these chemicals in this same area, same breast area, are these environmental estrogens accumulating. So we now can see the equation. We know that the chemicals are linked with cancer from studies on cells, from the studies of other chemicals that look the same, from studies on mice and rats. And we know there's a really, really strong link between breast cancer and exposure to these chemicals, which, by the way, we find in our everyday personal care and household products. So this is why I've been running a campaign for 30 years, just to educate people about, look, we don't need them. And that's why I love working with you guys, because you're out there saying the same things as me, just at a different level. So we know there is a link with breast cancer. There is no doubt. And I would venture to suggest that the rates of breast cancer, the increase in breast cancer, are probably, we're talking probably about 10 to 20% of the breast cancers now are coming from the products in and around our home and ones we put on our body. That's the figure that, yeah, it's an academic guess. I'm sorry, I don't have immense resources, but that's the type of figure that we're talking about now. So we know there is a link. Now, leaving breast cancer for the moment, and of course, I'm going to explain a little bit about that later on, and weight and how all this links in with weight gain and so on, a whole raft of things. But premature and precocious puberty is where infants go through puberty prematurely. And there are cases of 2 and 3 and 4-year-old girls developing breasts and secondary sexual characteristics. We now see girls 10, 11 and 12, whereas 100 years ago, most girls went through puberty at 15, 16 and 17 and 18. So very different. And nobody's bothering to ask what is causing it. What is causing it? And of course, clearly we know that these chemicals play havoc with the hormone system. We see the same things happening with male sperm and infertility. Infertility is rife. And of course, one of the first things everyone, I better go to get it all checked out and so on. The research shows avoid these chemicals, increase your nutrients, and you'll increase your sperm and increase fertility. So there's a whole raft, a whole body of evidence, again, showing these same chemicals. And then again, linking it with testicular cancer, testicular abnormalities, and low testosterone. Now, that's the first thing that it's going to point out, that these chemicals don't just play havoc with estrogen. That's why they're called endocrine disruptors. Endocrine means your hormones, not just estrogen. But these endocrine disruptors can play havoc with both estrogen and testosterone and other biochemicals in the body as well. But by playing havoc with testosterone in guys, first thing you're going to see is an increase in all these male-related problems. But you're also going to see a decrease in your energy. You're going to see a decrease in your metabolism. You're going to see a decrease. And this all links in then with weight gain and the ability not to lose weight, because testosterone, even in ladies, you've got a little bit of testosterone in there, and that drives the metabolic rates. So it's so important that these chemicals can play havoc with that. And of course, linked in with that is, of course, your thyroid and hypothyroidism. 30% of women, and we don't have the figures for men because for some reason it's not even looked at, but 30% of women have what's called subclinical hypothyroidism. That is, they've got thyroid issues, but it's not showing up in the figures and the numbers yet. So it's just below. A large number have also clinical hypothyroidism. And one of the things here is, of course, linked in with your thyroid gland is weight gain. One of the things associated, since I can remember, the thyroid activity, and your thyroid develops again with your hormones and so on, relates very much back to the level of energy you got, fatigued and run down. So if you're feeling fatigued and run down, one of the first things you'll want to look at is how these chemicals are playing havoc with your thyroid. We know they do. They're linked both directly. In fact, there are studies. There are studies done where they've looked at young children. In fact, the mother's exposure, and then they found that the children, 3, 4, 5, and studies. They followed this one group. In fact, this is about the best and biggest study. They followed this group along for, I think, about 9 years now, and every 3 years they related to the level of these chemicals in the mother's blood when she was pregnant and the level now at that different age, 3, 6, and 9. And they're consistently finding the thyroid problems in kids, in infants, in 3-year-olds, in 6-year-olds, in 9-year-olds, related to what the mother was exposed to back then, showing how long these chemicals can last, or at least the effects of these chemicals, but probably also showing that these kids are still exposed to these chemicals, and the fact that, you know, what it's doing. And if your thyroid is playing up, then you're going to have weight gain. You're going to have retention. Now, if you look at all of this, you can see, okay, so the toxic chemicals can affect the gut, and the gut obviously can then affect weight gain. It can affect your estrogen and testosterone, which can affect weight gain. Then it can affect your thyroid, which can affect weight gain. Now, there are lots of other theories out there too. There's probably another half a dozen. The body isn't so simple in this area. It's very complicated, but there's another half a dozen reasons why these toxic chemicals are literally leading to an increase in weight gain. And the first and best thing you can do is get rid of them, reduce your exposure. You can reduce your exposure to reduce your risk of weight gain and get rid of them. Now, that then leads you on to, well, where are we exposed? And, you know, we've got rid of a lot of them, the DDTs, some of the pesticides out there. You know, the amount that's in there has been dramatically reduced. Where we've actually increased, oops, we've lost one of my slides. I'll go back. Oh, no, it doesn't want to play that slide. Doesn't matter. So I'll come back to that one in a minute. Okay, this the one that's come up though is probably the easiest one to talk about. It's triclosan. Triclosan. And sorry, I can't stop it flicking through it. There's it just won't do it for me. I'll hold it. Triclosan is one of these environmental estrogens. Now, we know it's an environmental estrogen. In fact, what's really interesting is the European Union over the last 6 months has come out and said triclosan, parabens, and phthalates, which are what we find in our cosmetics and our personal care products, are all environmental estrogens or endocrine disruptors. Now, here is the funniest thing, that all the research on triclosan, which has been done over the last 30 or 40 years, say, look, it's ineffective. It's an antibacterial, antimicrobial agent. It used to be in everything. Fortunately, it's being phased out. In the US, they're phased out. In Europe, they're actually banning it outright. But there's only a few products that it's remaining in, one of which is toothpaste by Colgate. And they're one of the only few. But it's a classic example where the public have pushed this so fast that the regulatory authorities are just catching up. And what it shows, that apart from all these other things that, you know, might be it's a mild skin irritant, it might be mutagenic, it alters the hormone regulation. There is no doubt about it. And it's also got some contaminants in it. But what was interesting is that, like all of these chemicals, it's present in the urine of 75% of people over in the US aged over 5. In fact, a study done even more recently than the one I've quoted up there shows that it's in about 90% of young children to infants. Again, one of the reasons is the mums come home and think, well, we've got to do the right thing. We've got to get rid of all those bugs out of the kitchen and out of the house. And so we overuse all these deadly antimicrobial chemicals, which are effective in killing them, but are ineffective in reducing the incidence of any illness. In fact, they probably increase it. So the Food and Drug Administration in the US has already said, look, it's no more effective than washing your hands with soap and water. So just use soap and water. Simple, soft detergents, safer detergents. And industry is fighting tooth and nail to keep that in here. Now, with that in mind, that was one kind of case study I put up. But there are so many other ones out there. And the first that I suppose I did a little expose again on my Facebook was on parabens. Parabens are another great antimicrobial And you'll find them now in a lot of the antimicrobial creams, although they're being phased out. They used to be in a lot of the wipes, babies' wipes, but in the last 2 years, I've seen it go from about 50% into down to about 10% of the babies' wipes and wipes. So they're being phased out because the industry knows this is coming. Now, the interesting thing about parabens is that they also are very effective at preserving the smells, the colours, and so on. So they're used in basically all of your cosmetics and personal care products, unless the company, and there aren't many, unless the company, and I'm sure you can guess here, unless the company has made a major stance against these parabens. Now, the parabens, without any doubt, are linked with breast cancer. The parabens, without any doubt, are linked with changing the estrogen levels and testosterone levels, and all those things I mentioned earlier, without any doubt, are linked to these parabens. And of course, the researchers are now saying, hold on, we've been looking at one of them. But when you go to the research, you find it's not one that they're exposed to, but there are often 3, 4, 5, or even 6 parabens in every single one of these products. And of course, we know that the parabens accumulate because they're fat soluble. They're not a nice watery ones that goes in and goes out. And actually, they like accumulating. And these are one of the ones that peak in about 5 or 6 hours, and they're there days or even weeks later. Don't worry, I've got some good news for you here too along the way about how we can, some studies on getting rid of them. But we know these parabens accumulate, and we know they're in all of these products. So they're probably in about 90% of the personal care and cosmetic products, at least one, and often combinations. Now, along with the parabens, and again, these are the typical endocrine disruptors and so on, along with the parabens, you've got another fairly toxic group, the phthalates. And these are spelt funnily. It's PHTHALATES. These phthalates are, again, there's not one of them. There's a dozen of them, probably a half a dozen, that are typically used in your common consumer products. And a little bit like the parabens, they can act a bit of a preservative. They're good for holding on to colours and smells. Oh, by the way, with parabens and phthalates, if they're used in a fragrance, they're a secret ingredient and no one has to know. Nobody even knows that they're in there. In some cases, the companies don't even know because they don't test and they don't check. They just get the fragrances from the fragrance manufacturer who's put the parabens in there to stabilize them, to make sure that the smell lasts longer, and then they sell them on to the product. People making the products, and there they go. Then they may add their own or not, but it's not necessarily listed on the ingredients. But the studies, and a recent study dating back just the beginning of this year, which again is in the book Dangerous Beauty, shows that something like 90% of the cosmetic and personal care products have parabens, and a similar rate with these phthalates. And these phthalates have similar effects. In fact, what was interesting about the phthalates is that they seem to have a bigger effect, at least from the research on animals, on males than females. So the parabens affect the females. Most of the other ones affect the females more, but the parabens affect the phthalates affect the males more, and a lot more problems with testicular deformities, testicular cancer, and of course men's disease, old men's disease in young boys and things. Even as much as the bits not dropping when they should, and so on. So just use your imagination on that one. A little bit hard to explain without my pickies. But the message is we're exposed to this. And then, of course, there's the famous BPA, bisphenol A. And again, the European Union, now bisphenol A is found in most of your plastics, okay? A couple of good companies out there, and I'm sure you know, who have got rid of the BPA out of the plastic products. But most of the countries around the world are taking some stance on BPA. Not Australia, unfortunately. We're about 20 years behind. But in America, they've phased out BPA, bisphenol A, in plastic products related to infants and young children. So they've got them out of the baby bottles and the dummies or the pacifier and all those other bits and pieces. But they're allowed to be in anything over, anything for 3 to 5 year olds and up. So unfortunately, it's not making that much of a difference. But again, the companies, a lot of people around there who have plastic saying, well, let's get rid of it anyway. We don't want it. We know it's toxic, and we've started to face it. Another success story. And it's because of the consumer demand and the fact that there are people like yourselves out there raising people's awareness. Now, just recently, the European Union said BPA is an endocrine disruptor and that we need to take action to actually phase it out. So again, they've taken some steps along with phthalates and parabens. The European Union has actually said we're going to get rid of some of these chemicals quicker than the rest of the world. Now, another one of those little chemicals that most of you would be aware of is that there are endocrine disruptors, and I'm not going to go into them at all, are heavy metals. And unfortunately, we still find heavy metal contaminants in things like lipstick and some of the facial cosmetics. I love it when people say, mineral powders and so on. No one bothers to actually look what's in the mineral powder. Well, some companies do. They look at what's in the mineral powders and they make sure that, they've got rid of the toxic heavy metals, the mercuries and the leads out of there. It wasn't long ago that they actually found lead in powder. Oh, by the way, and of course asbestos and a few other issues in some of the powders. But probably the one I want to finish up on in terms of the endocrine disruptors is aluminium. And aluminium, without any doubt, is linked with breast cancer, with breast cancer. The mechanisms are all in there. You see, most of these chemicals don't just have the effect of causing the cancer, but they have the effect of causing it, expanding it, promoting it, and then helping it spread throughout the body, and then helping it get established, and then going through that cycle again. And when you've got to remember that you might have a product putting it under your arm which has got all of these ingredients in it, and any wonder why we have this rate of breast cancer and other problems associated with it. Again, it doesn't go through the liver to break down. It just goes straight up into that area of the breast where the breast cancers are now being developed. Now, we know aluminium is a cancer-causing agent. So the easiest way to get people off this is let's get away from the antiperspirants. Folks, we need to perspire. It's one of the body's best ability to detox, in other words, getting out of the body. Apart from the liver and urine. Okay, so it's getting it out of there when you perspire for a reason. Now, aluminium, there's no doubt about it. But I want to tell you now, and this takes me on kind of onto the final stage where I think I probably should be finishing up here. The great thing is there was a really, really good study at the end of last year. So that's 2016. And they got a group of about, I think it was about 100 young people from Spanish descent in America. By the way, the studies that are coming out of the US at the moment on this topic are just phenomenal. Just showing how many girls are exposed to these, and it's the young girls who have the highest exposure and so on. But in this one study, they just got the group to go in and reduce their exposure to cosmetics, only cosmetics. And they measured the levels of parabens and phthalates and other potential endocrine disruptors. They measured them in the beginning, then they took them off and they put them on safer products. Now, unfortunately, they could only rely on the company saying, yeah, we don't have them in there. What they did find is that some of the so-called alternative ones still had phthalates and parabens in there because they didn't even know. The companies weren't big enough or weren't doing their double checks and so on. So what they were finding is that while these girls were being exposed to having products that had low or none of these parabens, their levels went down, and over 3 to 4 days, the levels almost halved. So the fantastic thing about the study was to show that the body has an ability to get rid of them, even these ones that like accumulating. Now, probably to get rid of the rest of those chemicals, it would take up to a month, and then you'd probably get rid of 95, even 98% of them. You wouldn't get rid of all of it, but a month, based on those figures that I saw, it would probably take a month to get rid of all of them. Yet you got rid of 30, 40, almost up to 50% of some of those chemicals on that exposure by getting rid of that exposure. But it'll probably take a month. Now, as I said earlier, some of the alternative ones actually had some of the phthalates in it as well. So that exposure actually stayed the same or even went up. The good message here is lowering your exposure to these chemicals has a discernible effect. The research is now coming out. They're doing the tests, and I just wish they would have used a better range of products. So I'm going to wrap this up by saying at the end of this day, this is all about living clean, and the simplest way to live clean and look after your body is to make sure you don't put it in your body, or even more importantly, on your body. Because when you put it on your body, it doesn't get a chance to be broken down like it does if it goes through your gut. I'll leave you with there. I'm sure I've got lots of questions. We're going to be touring later on in August and then October down in Victoria. If you're interested in catching up with you. Speak to Annie and Charlie, and we'd love to catch up with you. And of course, show you the latest book, Dangerous Beauty. It is just phenomenal in terms of all this information. Thanks, guys. I look forward to hearing from you and speaking to you on our tour.
Thanks, Peter. That's absolutely fantastic. And the new book, what's it called? Dangerous Beauty, actually is not out yet.
Beauty, Annie. It's on the way, literally on the way to the printer to me now. So hopefully I will have it in 1 week's time.
Wow, how exciting. I'm looking for my advanced copy. So that is absolutely fantastic. Dangerous Beauty. Now, there's a number of books that if you are really interested in making your life absolutely live clean, if you are really committed to, living well, then there are a number of books, and Peter will be touring with those books. The Great Cholesterol Deception, my goodness, that is brilliant. Reversing Heart Disease is another one, which I've absolutely loved, and Unlock Your Genes for Weight Loss. There are only 4, and I've actually put the wood on him tonight to actually get writing on the next one as well, which I'm very excited about, and he hasn't started writing that one yet. But, that's what I love, is that we've got the ability to have some input into some awesome, awesome, awesome information, because Peter is the master of research, and you've heard that, and delivers it in a way that we understand. So I just want to say a huge thank you to you, Peter. As he said, we'll be certainly coming to Queensland regions, country towns and cities in August, September of this year with Dangerous Beauty. The talk will be based around the toxic chemicals in your bathrooms and your makeup and all the chemicals that are exactly what Peter was talking about today. And we'll be covering a little bit on weight loss and, the whole gut connection with the probiotic. And then he'll be heading down to Victoria in early October. So for the Victorians on the call tonight, that is absolutely wonderful that you'll have Peter in your regions as well. So absolutely fantastic. So I just want to say a huge thank you, Peter. And if you've got questions, certainly come along to one of our talks. He's going to be in various parts of Toowoomba, Brisbane, and then all through country Queensland. So come along and have Peter answer your questions. There's not one question he's afraid of, trust me. It'll be absolutely brilliant. So just wrapping up tonight, just want to say a huge thank you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we'll be having another Live Clean Health webinar series next Tuesday night. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Pete.